The stars glittered like frozen sparks against the endless black, a million cold witnesses to the coming storm. Across the galaxy, fleets clashed and empires schemed, each maneuvering for dominance in the fragile balance of power. Yet, in the quiet orbit above Earth's third moon, a forgotten warship drifted in silence. The USS Resolute was not impressive. Its hull was a patchwork of old steel and half-repaired plating. Scars from long-forgotten battles still etched its flanks, and its engines groaned with the effort of every test firing. Once, decades ago, it had been the pride of the United Terran Navy. Now it was mocked, whispered about as a relic too stubborn to die. Even Earth's own citizens called it the Rusted Ghost, a ship fit for museums, not war. Captain Daniel Hayes stood alone on the command deck, staring at the streaks of starlight beyond the viewport. His reflection stared back at him, a man in his mid-40s, the lines around his eyes carved by loss as much as age. He wore his uniform with dignity, though the cuffs were worn, the rank insignia scratched. He looked like his ship, weathered, underestimated, yet unbroken. The doors hissed open behind him. "Captain," came the voice of Commander Sarah Whitfield, his executive officer. She was tall, composed, with steel in her posture and doubt flickering in her sharp gray eyes. She carried a data pad tucked beneath one arm. "The Council broadcast went live an hour ago. You'll want to see this." Hayes didn't turn. "Let me guess. Another reminder of how obsolete we are?" Whitfield hesitated. "Worse. They laughed at us. Again." A humorless smile tugged at Hayes' lips. "The galaxy always laughs until it bleeds." Whitfield said nothing. She'd served under Hayes for years and knew when not to argue. Instead, she handed over the datapad. The recording showed a panel of alien officials, shimmering in robes of jeweled silk. The Galactic Council, the so-called arbiters of peace. One reptilian delegate hissed something, translated into Earth's language. "A Terran ship, the Resolute, will patrol the Ketheri border." A bold gesture. Almost charming. Like giving a child a wooden sword. The chamber erupted with laughter. Hayes shut the feed off. His jaw tightened. "They don't understand humans." "Not yet." Before Whitfield could respond, the comms console chirped. A younger voice, nervous but eager, filled the bridge. "Captain? Ensign Alvarez reporting from Sensor Watch. You'll want to come see this." The sensor bay was a cramped chamber filled with humming consoles and flickering holodisplays. Ensign Mark Alvarez, barely 25, stood at the primary station, his dark hair messy from too many sleepless shifts. His brown eyes lit up as Hayes and Whitfield entered. "I've been tracking unusual movements near the Ketheri sector," Alvarez said, pulling up a projection. A swarm of red icons bloomed on the holographic map, converging like a stormfront. "They're mobilizing. Hundreds of ships. And they're not posturing this time, they're setting up for a push." Whitfield frowned. "How reliable is this data?" "As reliable as I can make it," Alvarez replied, defensiveness creeping into his tone. "Cross-checked the relay buoys twice. The Dominion isn't playing games." Hayes studied the swarm of enemy vessels. The Ketheri Dominion, a war-hungry empire of scaled warriors, feared for their brutality. If this fleet crossed into human space, it wouldn't be a skirmish. It would be an invasion. "And they're ignoring us?" Hayes asked. Alvarez nodded. "Not a single ping from their scouts. To them, the Resolute doesn't even exist." Whitfield folded her arms. "Maybe they're right." "With what?" "2 functioning plasma batteries, engines that overheat after a 30-second burn, and shielding that barely qualifies as shielding? We'd be scrap in the first salvo." "Maybe," Hayes said softly. His eyes were locked on the projection, but his mind was far away back to a briefing room years ago, to secret words whispered by admirals before the Resolute was mothballed. Words about experimental systems hidden beneath the old hull, systems the Council had laughed off as failures. But Hayes had never laughed. He remembered the fire those weapons had breathed, and the warnings they carried: unstable, dangerous, not fit for war. Now, perhaps, they would have to be. The order from Earth came hours later. It was short, cold, and absolute. USS Resolute will hold the line until reinforcements arrive. Do not yield. Whitfield slammed her fist against the console. This is insanity. They're sending us to die. Maybe, Hayes replied. He didn't raise his voice, but the steel in it silenced the room. But our duty isn't to survive. It's to make sure humanity does. The crew stared at him. Alvarez swallowed hard, but his voice was steady. Then we'll fight. Even if they think we're a joke. For the first time that day, Hayes allowed himself a real smile. Good. Because we're about to prove the galaxy wrong. Preparations began at once. The Resolute's decks shook as engineers coaxed life into forgotten systems. Plasma conduits were rerouted, old targeting arrays recalibrated. Alvarez worked feverishly, running diagnostics on sensor suites older than he was. Whitfield paced like a hawk, drilling the crew until their movements were sharp and practiced. Beneath the rust and scars, the Resolute stirred. The ship was old, yes. Outdated, mocked, forgotten. But it was not dead. Its heart still beat, engines growling with a primal hunger. And in the silence of space, as the first whispers of the Kethri fleet drew closer, the Resolute waited. Captain Hayes returned to the viewport one last time before the storm. The stars glimmered coldly back at him. His reflection was steady now, his doubts burned away. He thought of every council delegate who had laughed, every enemy captain who dismissed humanity as weak, every officer who called his ship a relic. They'll see, he whispered. By God, they'll see. Far beyond the edge of human space, the Kethri Armada advanced, its war drums echoing through the void. And at the border, like a lone sentinel before a tidal wave, the rusted ghost stood ready. The warship no one took seriously, until now. The silence of space broke with a ripple of distortion. On the edge of human territory, the Kethri Dominion fleet emerged from hyperspace, ship after ship materializing in cold flashes of blue light. Frigates with serrated hulls, cruisers bristling with plasma cannons, and carriers that resembled armored predators. Their armada stretched across the void like a wall of steel and fire, hundreds strong. And facing them, alone, was the USS Resolute. On the bridge, the air was taut with anticipation. The hum of consoles filled the silence, broken only by the occasional clipped report. The crew watched the swarm of red icons crawl across their holomap, closing in like a tide. They're spreading into attack formation, Ensign Alvarez reported, his voice a little too high-pitched, betraying nerves. Estimate, 300 ships, minimum. Flagship identified Bloodfang. That's a Dominion warcruiser. Twice our length, 5 times our firepower. Commander Sarah Whitfield stood at Hayes' side, arms folded. Her expression was all calculation and cold dread. 300 against 1. Even if our systems hold, the math doesn't change, Captain. Hayes didn't flinch. His hands rested on the rail before the command chair, his gaze locked on the endless dark beyond the viewport. The math never favors the desperate. But sometimes, desperation wins. He sank into the chair, his voice firm. Signal Earth Command. Inform them the Dominion fleet has entered Terran space. Then cut the channel. From here on out, we fight. Aye, sir, Whitfield said, masking her doubt with crisp efficiency. The first hail came minutes later. A guttural voice, filtered through translation, filled the bridge, human relic, surrender and drift aside. Your ship is an insult to battle. Abandon it, and perhaps your lives will be spared. Whitfield glanced at Hayes, expecting him to reply. He shook his head. Let them think we're silent because we're afraid. Instead, he activated a private channel. Weapons control. Status? Plasma batteries at 70% efficiency, came the reply from Chief Gunner Wallace, a grizzled veteran who had practically grown up with the ship. The old coils are whining like hell, but they'll fire when you give the word. Grav cannons are temperamental. Hayes allowed a thin smile. Temperamental might be enough. The first volley lit the void. A dozen Dominion frigates surged ahead, spitting emerald plasma that streaked toward the Resolute. Shields flared blue as the impact rattled the hull, alarms screaming across the bridge. Shields down to 85. Alvarez shouted. One more volley like that, Anne. Target lead frigate, Hayes ordered, calm despite the shaking deck. Fire plasma batteries. The Resolute groaned as her ancient cannons spun to life. Twin lances of molten fire speared into the void, slamming into the Dominion frigate's flank. The alien ship buckled, broke, and exploded in a shower of green flame. The bridge erupted with cheers, brief but fierce. For a moment, hope flared. Then the Dominion responded. Dozens of warships opened fire, waves of plasma and kinetic missiles streaking toward the lone Terran vessel. The void became a storm. Shields flared, hull plating screamed as impacts ripped across the Resolute. Systems sparked, smoke filled the bridge. Shields at 45%. Alvarez cried. We can't take this. Hold the line. Hayes roared. Whitfield, bring us about. Angle the forward plating. Let them hit the armor, not the core. The old ship twisted in the void, groaning as thrusters strained. Shots that might have gutted her instead slammed into her reinforced prow. The Resolute staggered, but she did not fall. Whitfield gritted her teeth. We can't just trade fire. We'll be dust in minutes. Hayes' eyes narrowed. Then we don't trade. We cut. He opened a column to engineering. Activate the gravitic projector. A stunned silence answered. Then the chief engineer's voice, strained and fearful, Sir, that system was mothballed for a reason. The recoil alone could tear us in half. That's an order, Hayes snapped. On the bridge, a low hum began to rise, deep and primal. Lights flickered. The air itself seemed to vibrate. From the belly of the Resolute, an ancient weapon awoke. A pulse of distorted gravity rippled outward, invisible to the eye but merciless to everything it touched. The nearest Dominion cruiser suddenly lurched sideways, its hull bending like soft metal. Alarms shrieked across their channels as the ship collapsed in on itself, crushed by a force it could not withstand. In seconds, the cruiser was nothing but twisted debris. The bridge crew of the Resolute sat in stunned silence. Alvarez whispered, We just folded a cruiser. Whitfield's eyes widened. God help us, it actually works. Hayes' gaze was cold, steady. Then let's make them regret ever laughing at us. Fire again. The battle became chaos. The Dominion ships pressed harder, furious at the loss of their cruiser. But every time they closed, the Resolute answered with fury. Plasma batteries seared frigates in two. Grav cannon pulses crushed hulls like tin. Missiles the crew thought long defunct suddenly roared to life, their warheads tearing holes in the enemy formation. The Resolute was old, yes, but she was armed with humanity's strangest, most dangerous experiments. And in the hands of desperate men and women, she was lethal. But the cost was brutal. Every weapon fired strained the ship's failing systems. Shields flickered dangerously low. Hull decks went dark. A fire raged in engineering, and medics carried bloodied crew through smoke-choked corridors. On the bridge, sweat poured down Alvarez's face as he fought to keep sensors online. They're regrouping. Flagship moving into position. Whitfield's voice was raw from shouting commands. Captain, we can't hold this line forever. Every system is bleeding out. Hayes' hand tightened on the armrest. He could feel the ship trembling beneath him, every vibration like a heartbeat. The Resolute was alive, fighting with them, bleeding with them. We don't need to hold forever, he said quietly. His eyes locked on the massive red icon of the Dominion flagship, the Bloodfawn. We just need to kill their heart. The Bloodfawn loomed on the viewscreen, a monster of black metal and glowing crimson engines. Its cannons lit, plasma charging for a strike that would obliterate the Terran relic in one blast. Hayes leaned forward. All batteries on the flagship. Prepare the grav cannon for maximum output. This ends now. The crew obeyed, fear giving way to grim determination. Sparks flew, consoles overloaded,
but the weapons came online. Alvarez's voice shook.
If this backfires, Captain, it'll tear us apart before it touches them.
Hayes' lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Then let's hope we break first, after they do.
The Dominion flagship fired. A torrent of emerald fire streaked toward the Resolute.
And the Resolute fired back. The void lit up like a sun. Plasma tore through space, missiles streaked like meteors, and the grav cannon unleashed a wave that bent light itself.
The two warships collided with fury enough to shake the stars. When the light cleared, one ship still stood. The Resolute, scarred, burning, but unbroken.
The Blood Fawn drifted, its hull shattered, its core rupturing.
The flagship of the Dominion was dying. On the Resolute's bridge, the crew sat in stunned silence, staring at the impossible.
Hayes exhaled slowly.
His voice was steady, almost calm. Signal to all ships in range.
Message is simple: Earth stands.
The wreckage of the Dominion flagship, Bloodfang, burned against the stars like a dying sun.
Shattered hull fragments drifted in slow arcs, glowing with the last heat of destruction.
For a heartbeat, the void was silent. Then the rest of the Ketheri fleet roared.
Dozens of ships surged forward, enraged at the loss of their flagship. Plasma fire lit the darkness in furious torrents, streaks of green and white crossing the void like thunderbolts.
The Resolute shuddered as volley after volley slammed into her failing shields.
On the bridge, alarms wailed.
Sparks burst from consoles, smoke hung heavy in the air.
Shields are gone. Ensign Alvarez shouted, his voice hoarse.
We're wide open, Captain.
Damage across decks 5 through 9, reported a frantic crewman. Casualties mounting, fires in the lower hangars.
Commander Whitfield gripped the railing, her face pale but resolute. Daniel, we can't take another barrage like that.
They'll gut us.
Captain Daniel Hayes sat in his command chair, his uniform streaked with soot and blood from a gash at his temple. Yet his eyes burned with a calm fire. He looked around at his bridge crew, men and women who had fought with him when all odds said they'd already be dust.
They weren't broken. Not yet. No, Hayes said softly. We're not finished. Not until the last of them scatters.
The Dominion fleet closed in, confident now that the Terran relic had spent its fury. Cruisers angled their massive cannons.
Carriers launched swarms of fighters, their engines buzzing like hornets.
Whitfield turned sharply.
We can't win by brute force.
But if we can take out their command ships, the rest might fall into disarray.
Alvarez's fingers flew across his console, sweat dripping down his brow.
There, he said, pulling up a hollow projection. 3 Dominion command cruisers, heavily armored, coordinating the rest of the fleet.
If we hit their comm relays hard, they'll be blind and leaderless. Hayes' jaw tightened.
Then we cut the head off the snake. He stood, voice rising above the chaos. All batteries, target command ships. Helm, burn the engines, take us right through the heart of their formation.
The helmsman gawked at him.
Sir, if we dive into their line, we'll be in the one place their numbers count for nothing, Hayes said.
Close range. Ship to ship. Let's make them bleed.
The Resolute surged forward, her old engines screaming in protest. The void blurred as the Terran warship plunged into the storm, weaving between plasma bolts and missile trails. The Dominion fighters swarmed like vultures, strafing her flanks, but the Resolute's gunners answered with fury, tearing them from the sky in bursts of fire.
Target lock on first command cruiser. Whitfield barked. Plasma batteries, fire.
Hayes roared. Twin lances of molten energy speared the void, slamming into the enemy cruiser's calm tower.
The alien ship staggered, its signals flickering into chaos. The surrounding Dominion vessels faltered, their formation shattering. Cheers erupted on the bridge, but Alvarez's voice cut through, more fighters inbound. Dozens, no, hundreds.
On the viewscreen, the swarm closed in, blotting out the stars.
Missile bays, all tubes, Hayes commanded. Load everything we've got. Aye, sir. The Resolute spat fire.
A storm of missiles streaked outward, cutting through the fighter swarm in blossoms of flame.
Dozens of enemy craft exploded, their fragments spinning into the void.
But still more pressed on, relentless, clawing at the Terran hull. The ship shook violently as impacts tore through her plating. A section of Deck 9 erupted in fire. Screams filled the comms before the channel went dead.
Structural integrity failing. Whitfield shouted.
"We can't take this much longer."
Hayes' eyes locked on the second command cruiser.
"We don't need much longer." The grav cannon thrummed to life again, the sound deep and terrible. The old weapon's coils glowed red, pushing the ship itself to the edge of destruction.
"Grav cannon, maximum charge," Hayes ordered. "Captain," the recoil Alvarez began. Hayes cut him off.
"If we don't end this now, there won't be a ship left to recoil."
The weapon fired.
The void warped as gravity twisted, ripping the Dominion cruiser apart from the inside out. The ship folded in on itself, collapsing like a tin can crushed by a giant's fist. The shockwave hurled nearby frigates into each other, shredding them in a chain of explosions. The bridge crew clung to their stations as the Resolute shuddered violently, her hull groaning under the strain. For a moment, Hayes thought the ship herself might tear apart. But when the light cleared, the Resolute still lived.
Barely.
And only one Dominion command ship remained.
The final cruiser rallied what forces it could, pulling the fleet into a desperate counter-formation. Plasma fire poured into the void, hammering the Resolute.
Alarms screamed.
Fires erupted on 3 decks at once.
Whitfield staggered, blood on her face.
"We can't survive another pass." Hayes stood tall, voice cutting through the chaos like steel. "Then we don't survive. We win."
He turned to Alvarez.
"Find me their weakness." The young ensign's hands flew. His eyes widened. "There. Their reactors venting plasma through an auxiliary channel.
If we hit it precisely, it'll chain react through their core."
Hayes nodded once. "Helm, bring us in close."
Whitfield, ready every gun we have left.
The Resolute plunged toward the Dominion flagship, battered and burning, yet defiant. Enemy fire tore chunks from her hull. Deck plating peeled away.
But the ship did not falter.
"Target locked." Whitfield shouted. Hayes' voice was steady. "All guns. Fire." The Resolute unleashed hell. Plasma, missiles, railfire all tore into the Dominion cruiser's vent channel.
For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the enemy ship bloomed into fire, its core detonating in a violent cascade. The blast ripped through the void, hurling debris across the Dominion formation. The remaining ships, leaderless, scattered, terrified, broke ranks and fled.
The great Dominion fleet, hundreds strong, was no more. On the bridge of the Resolute, silence fell.
Smoke hung thick in the air, consoles flickering. The crew sat in stunned disbelief, battered and bleeding, but alive. Alvarez slumped back in his chair, his voice trembling.
We actually did it. 300 ships, against one."
Whitfield leaned against the railing, her chest heaving. Her gray eyes met Hayes, disbelief giving way to awe.
"Daniel, they'll never laugh again." Hayes stood slowly, his body aching, his ship groaning around him.
He looked out at the wreckage, at the smoldering remains of the fleet that had thought them a joke. "No," he said softly. His voice was raw, but steady.
"From this day on, they'll remember."
Hours later, when Earth Command re-established contact, the message they received was simple.
"This is the USS Resolute." The line held. The Dominion fleet is no more. Across the galaxy, the story spread like wildfire.
The ship mocked as a relic had become a legend.
And the galaxy learned a truth it would never forget. Underestimate humanity at your peril.